What's up guys, Cwesolo here, and today we're back for another Blueprinting 101 video. In this video, we're going to be covering loops. Unreal Engine actually has several different kinds of loops, and we're going to be covering them all in this video. I believe there are 4 kinds of loops in Unreal Engine. There are while loops, for each loops, and then there's for loops with breaks and for each loops with breaks. So I guess there's like 5 different kinds of loops. We're going to be covering all of them and how they work and what they do, and maybe give some use cases and applications of how you would use a loop in your games. So with that being said, I guess we'll just get right into this. So here we are in Engine. I'm going to show each of these and talk about how they work and what they do, and pretty much like show some use cases, even though like the use cases that I have made for them are kind of example use cases. They're really not a use case that you would actually be using them for, but it'll give you the general premise and idea of how they work, and it'll give you an understanding so that way you can use them yourself. So to start with, we'll start with the while loop, because I think this one's probably going to be the easiest one to understand, because our last video went over branches and Boolean conditions and stuff like that. So the while loop works very similarly to a branch statement. If you remember, a branch statement takes in a Boolean value, which is a true or false statement, and it determines whether or not it's true or false, right? Well, the while loop works very similarly, where it takes in a condition that is true or false, and it will loop whether or not that condition is true or false, right? So it's going to loop while some condition is being met, and then once that condition is no longer able to be met, it will break out of the loop, and it will fire off this completed node. It does take in some execution nodes, so like wherever you want to start this, whether you press a key or it comes off begin play or something along those lines, or if it's coming off like a branch statement, it just has some input pin that like starts this whole execution, and then it repeatedly loops until it can, while a condition is true. It even says it right here, repeatedly executes loop body as long as a condition is true, and then once it is no longer true, it will stop looping. There is something to be concerned about here, is that with while loops, it's actually quite easy to make infinite loops. So if you create an infinite loop, your engine will blow up and it'll tell you, hey, there's an infinite loop, and it won't work. So that is something to be careful of. I will also mention that it is uncommon to use while loops generally. It is more common to see for loops or for each loops while programming. It isn't just with video games. This is also just as a general thing. It is more common to see for loops out in the wild. And even when you're using them yourself, you're more apt to use a for loop or for each loop. Also, I did want to point out an example of a while loop is the event tick. The event tick is an example of a while loop. So basically, event tick is calling every frame, so it's repeatedly calling over and over and over again. That is something like a while loop, so it is looping every frame, right? So that is an example of a while loop. But yeah, that's pretty much the while loop. I will show you some code for it and how I decided to use it for our example. So for our while loop code, so this is for the while loop, I created a custom event that'll fire off at begin play. Each of these are going to fire off in order. So we're starting with the while loop, then for loop, for each loop with break, for each loop, or for loop with break, and for each loop with break. I'm going to go over them in that order. But pretty much for our while loop, we are basically going to be filling a list of numbers, which is an array. We'll be covering arrays in a different video, but for the purposes of loops, they're kind of useful for this case, because generally it's easy to loop over a body of elements or a list of elements. So we have a list of numbers, and we are basically checking if its length is less than 50. And we're looping while the length is less than 50. And then we have an index here, which is keeping track of which index we're on within the list, so which number we're pulling, pretty much. And then we are inserting a random integer with a max value of 50 into the list, and then we are just incrementing the index up by 1, so that way we can continue moving down the list, inserting more and more items. So as we can see here, like when we click on this, we have several elements. We can make as many as we want here, but in this case, it's all being made in code. So that's pretty much how that works. And then once it is done, once we complete it, it fires off the completed execution here, and it'll fire off these nodes and print a string saying that the loop is completed. And that's pretty much how that works. It's fairly simple and easy. And like I said, while this condition is true, it will loop until this condition is no longer true. Once it is no longer true, it breaks out and fires off the completed node. And that's it's fairly simple. The next one that we're going over is the for loop. So the for loop has an input. So wherever we're going to execute it from, it has a looping body just like the while loop. It has an index node here, so we can pull this off if we need to keep track of the index for whatever reason. And then it has a completed node here that we could fire off to whenever it's completed if you have more functionality you need to do once it's done. It takes in 2 integers, so the first integer would be whatever number you want to start from, and the last index, which is what you want to end at. These can be variables, so you can make this like, for example, we can use our numbers list. We can start at the 0 and end at the length of the index as an example to start from 0 to whatever. And we could loop over that, and it'll pretty much loop until then. And the example I had for this is just to simply loop over integers and just print them to the screen. So in this case, we're starting at the value of 0 and going all the way up to 50. So this is going to loop from 0 to 50 once the condition is no longer met. So once this index is above 50, it breaks out and it'll complete. So it just loops until to the stop index. So it starts at an index and it stops at an index. Starts, ends, loops through those numbers. And that's that. And that'll print them to the screen. The for loop with break. So this is the same thing as a for loop, but it has this little break execution spot here. Basically how this works is if basically like for whatever reason you want to break out of the loop prematurely, so you don't want to run to completion, right? So as an example, like say I'm looping through and I am looking for, if a specific number pops up, right? So like say like we're looping over, from 0 to 50,000 and say 49,553 pops up. We want to just break out right then and there. Generally, this would pop off if you're looking for a specific piece of data and you don't want to continue looking for data. So say, for example, you have a list of items and you want to just break and just get out once you find what you're looking for. That is a scenario where a for loop with a break is very useful when you're just trying to pull data and you're just looking for a specific piece and you don't want to continue iterating over the rest of it because you already found what you're looking for. That is a scenario where a for loop with break is quite nice. So basically, once this break execution happens, it instantly jumps to completed and it calls it a day. So as you can see here, I have a for loop with break. We loop through from 0 to 50,000. We're going to go ahead and print each number to the screen, and I'm just grabbing a random integer with the max value of 50,000. Hopefully we get that value, and if it equals out, if it's true, so we'll break out of the loop, and we'll call the break, and it will just complete right off the bat. And that's that. And that's the for loop with break. So it's fairly simple, just like the for loop, with the fact that if we need to break out prematurely, we can break out prematurely and jump to completed. That's the difference. The for each loop. So these ones are tailored specifically for arrays. So this is when you are wanting to loop over an array body. Or a list of items. So pretty much it has the same thing as the for loop and the while loop, except that it takes in an array of whatever type you want. So it can be of booleans, floats, strings, integers, longs, whatever. I don't think Unreal Engine has them listed as longs. I think they're in 64s. Yeah, integer 64, it's a long, same thing. And pretty much it'll loop over the list of elements, and you get a loop body. So this is whatever we want, whatever functionality we want to have happening while it's looping. We can pull off an array element if we need to pull out that specific element that we're working at. It keeps track of the index, so in case we ever need to keep track of the index for whatever reason in our functionality in our body, and it has a completed node to continue functionality after the loop. An example I have for that is we are just going to loop over each number in our list that we made up in the while loop, and we're going to go ahead and just print them out. Keep in mind, you can also use this to it's generally for looping over elements and getting them out of a loop. But we can use the for loop up here to fill an array too. I did want to mention that, and maybe we should have done that here, but I figured this was the simplest way to do it. But we could use this whole functionality here, and actually it would be better to fill an array using a for loop over a while loop. I'm just pointing that out. But pretty much, yeah, it'll loop over and just print every number to the screen. But obviously, like, your functionality might be more in depth than that. You may have to do more in your loop body than just pulling a number out and printing it to the screen. And then once it's completed, it just goes to completed. And the last one, the for loop with break. So the for loop with break takes in an array, it takes in a break execution just like before, and it loops over a body, and it works in the same way that the for each loop works. In this case, I decided to do a for each loop with break, take our numbers list, and basically just like check if some value is equal to 45. So if 45 ends up in the array, then we will break, because that was the value that we're looking for. So we'll break, and then it'll jump to completed right away. Otherwise, it'll just continue printing out all the numbers as needed. So yeah, that's pretty much it. As we can see, when we go into engine here, we'll just get a whole list. So the while loop completed, here's the for loop. The for loop with break completed, it never broke, but the for loop with for each loop did break. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how each of the loops work in Unreal Engine. There is no do while loop, but in C++ there is. Maybe we'll do a C++ in Unreal Engine coding video somewhere videos down the road. But yeah, there is no do while, just while, for, and for each loops with breaks, the respective loops with the breaks. But yeah, that's pretty much that. Fairly simple. They're just looping over something over and over and over again until some condition is no longer able to be met. And that is pretty much the case with all of them, except that for loops work with numbers and while loops work with a condition. Fairly simple. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked the video or you found it helpful, please do leave a like, comment if you have any questions or anything like that. I'll do my best to answer them. And be sure to check out The Amazing Ball on Steam. I have a link in the description for that. And I hope you have a great day, and have a good one. Peace out.